welcome to this close-up session.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So in the early 90s, you were a student at Napier. So you want to show us a little bit of what you were doing at that time that shaped the way for what subsequently followed?
Sure, I'll bring up some photos of sort of around that time, what I was working on. I thought it might be interesting, rather than just showing you the more recent stuff, is maybe to give that kind of journey in a sense of what I was doing. And this is at Napier, as you said. Quite a lot of this work wasn't actually coursework though. Some of it was. And I did this back in Stirling where my mum was living, and I'd be going back and photographing within that sort of area at that time. The other kind of work that I was doing was also in Edinburgh. So, I mean, basically I really loved documentary work. I didn't have an awful lot of time because I was working an awful lot at the same time as I was studying. So I worked in the bingo, so I tried to take advantage of that in a sense, and that I photographed in those areas that I was actually working in as well.
Well, there's a further backstory to this, Margaret, because you left home at 17, didn't you?
I did, yeah.
You went abroad and you worked in bars and that type of service industry job.
Yeah.
And you saved up some money and you bought your first SLR camera, didn't you?
That's true, yeah. That's my photography story. Yeah.
Yeah, it's when you came back, you then decided to apply to do photography at Napier.
That's right. I mean, I couldn't afford to buy a camera when I was young. My family couldn't afford to buy me cameras, you know, like SLR cameras. So when I was 17, I went abroad. I thought I would go there for a year. I really liked languages, and I ended up staying, and I worked in all these different sort of, you know, service industries, as you said. And during that time, you know, I really sort of solidified my ideas that I wanted to study photography. And it was at that point that I bought a camera, came back. And I mean, it was interesting because my family had moved from where I grew up, around Plean and Dunblane, and they'd moved back to Stirling. And so I found myself coming back to this new environment, but with, you know, familiar people. And that probably played quite a large part in me photographing them, you know, at that time. This girl here is actually just somebody that I met in Stirling who was living in the Ratploch, and she was part of a larger project around young people at that time. This picture as well is, I mean, I can see my mum's house in this picture, so it's quite interesting for me to look back at these, because it's more than just me looking at my mum's neighbour's daughter. It's also looking back at a time when my family lived there, you know. So it's quite interesting in that way. I think it's quite difficult to divorce yourself as a photographer sometimes from the history that surrounds it. I mean, I was also doing the kind of work with this, was more like community-based work. So when I left, this is after that I left Napier, and I sort of wondered, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I decided that I really wanted to get into sort of community practice, so that's where sort of I went with this. But at the same time as doing that, so I worked with people in the community in sort of different settings. With this was actually within a women in HIV setting. But at the same time, I was lucky enough, I was getting some commissions up from London. And this was actually a commissioned exhibition, this one. And this was Anne, who I worked with. And she was termed at that time a long-term survivor of HIV. And she'd been a survivor at that time of 10 years with HIV in Edinburgh. And so she sort of said to me that she felt between life and death. And so we took that into the photograph.
Yeah. So it was fairly multifaceted, that project, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was lots of, there was the element where I was going in, I think it was over 2 years, I actually worked with a women's group, you know, Women in HIV group. And that work was then shown at the Collective Gallery in Edinburgh, that the work that the women did during that time. But also I was producing my own work, you know, in addition to that sort of more sort of commissioned work for gallery work done in London.
Yeah. What do you think drew you into community-based practice? You know, I think it's very interesting how some artists and photographers manage to balance their own creative work with that other work, which is about bringing the creativity out in others.
I think, I think it felt really important for me to take, not, I wouldn't call it skills, you know, but that kind of, the knowledge of how to turn people's experiences into photographs. And it seemed like when I left university, it seemed like a good sort of way for my work to go. I'd been working already in sort of, you know, I was interested in issues-based work. So it was kind of like a natural progression probably to start doing that as well.
Yeah,
you know,
it's quite important that though, isn't it? You know, it's about the tools, giving people the tools and the skills to document their own lives in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, this work is done in Craig Miller, and it was, you know, it was one of the first places in Scotland. I think it was the first place in Scotland where women could take their children into a rehab unit at the time. And, you know, I also wanted to share, we did quite a lot of work, but we did it in the evenings because it happened to be during winter time that we were doing this project. So I also went back at the weekend. This was through ArtLink in Edinburgh. And I went back at the weekend and asked the women that would set up some, you know, do some portraits. But I also wanted to bring the family into that. So at the last minute, I handed over, you know, that basically the power of taking their own picture by the long cable release.
How long did you do that project for?
I think the whole project, you know, me going in there probably lasted for a year, like once a week. And I could only do it in the evenings because it was the only time that they were available to do it.
Yeah. So was that work shown in a variety of settings, do you recall?
That work was shown over within Craig Miller quite a lot. So it was shown in the sort of local cafes and local places, and it was quite important, it felt, to actually take that work out there so that it wasn't, you know, people were wondering who are the women who are in this house, and in a way it was this kind of community, you know, welcoming them into people's lives, you know, by taking it out and showing that work in the community. And obviously everybody is in agreement for that to happen.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to, you know, ask people what they want to do with the work as well. It's not just a question of you deciding to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, this work here as well sort of went on from the sort of similar interests. So the work went on to looking at, you know, more sort of childhood issues. So looking at the paths that children were taking in life. And this one was done over in the Netherlands, and it was, in some ways, it was a fairly short project. You know, I was asked to come in and photograph children who lived in this community, and I was really interested. I was quite intrigued about, you know, what their childhood was like. So that's what I went in to photograph that, and probably only about a period of about a week, you know, for this project. So some of my projects take years to do, and other ones are done within a very short space of time. They're very intensively planned, basically. I think and then this is another one. This is more recent. This is maybe 4 years ago. So again, it's just looking at, you know, sort of thinking about childhood and where, you know, the path that children's lives are going to take. And a lot of the time, at the time I was taking these photographs, my son was quite young. This is actually a classmate of my son. And I would take, again, it's that thing about opportunity of what your life is leading you into yourself. And so I would go to the park after school and I photographed this little girl in the park playing after school. So it's, you know, it's about taking those opportunities where you can, for me, a little bit. I think probably my family work has been, you know, the stuff that's been most shown recently. And, you know, if I sort of rewind to the sort of beginning of that, you know, this is the kind of work that I was doing right at the very beginning in my family work. And I come from a very big family. I've got, you know, it's not just my sister Andrea's family that I photographed. I have a much larger family than that. And when I went back to Stirling, you know, after I came back from abroad, My mum, my brother and my sister were all living in the rat block at that time. And so I was photographing them and what their lives were like at that time. This is my brother John and his family. And they left, sorry?
That wasn't included in your original family work, though, was it?
No, not at all. I mean, it was just another, project that I was doing. I mean, I think it was a case of, me photographing what I knew a little bit, and probably very interested in this, what the notion of family is. And I had been away for quite a long time myself, and coming back, it was a way of reconnecting in a way. And I was also had this new interest at that time, which was photography. So I was kind of reconnecting, I guess, and trying to sort of then show their lives through this new thing that I was doing. And then my brother moved from where he was staying in Stirling, and moved out closer to Alloa to a farmhouse, and it was like a biker's commune, but it wasn't a massive place. It was just a few families, and he moved out there, I guess, to look at how to leave behind some social difficulty, and I also went there and I did a fairly large documentary at that time on his life, and again, it's just not stuff that I've shown very much.
Okay.
I did photograph my sister again. This is Andrea and Chick. So this predates the family work, which is probably the work that's been shown like the most at and in this place. And I found this picture fairly recently. And it was just Andrea sitting with Chick. And it was just, obviously I carried my camera around with me quite a bit. And there was only, I think there's 2 pictures on the roll. And it was just Andrea sitting there. I think she was talking to her, This isn't a portrait, it's a completely candid photograph. And I think for me, finding this picture, it was quite interesting because the living room's the same as the living room where I photographed her, the picture on the wall and the mantelpiece, the ornaments have changed. So it's this kind of, this continuation that I was doing all the time with them. And so I did photograph them quite a lot as they were growing up, and this is Stephen and Chick as well. This again, it wasn't for any reason. This would have been while I was at Napier, and again, it wasn't for any kind of coursework. This particular work, some of my work did go into coursework. The family series did, for example, but preceding all that, all this sort of black and white work that I was doing, didn't. And I mean, in a sense, as a photographer, what you're doing is you're finding your way as a photographer. You're kind of maybe going away from 35mm and medium format, all the text stuff as well. And so for me, there was a little bit of that involved, that side of it.
Yeah. And how did you refine these images?
I mean, some of them I've sort of found over the years, like finding them just in my, do you mean like for in my negative folder or that, or just
yes.
How do I find
like, how have they remained hidden for so long?
In my negative folders, which are piled up behind me.
yeah.
Which are still in a state of getting organised. It will happen. Yeah, and I mean, I still found, I went the other day to look for something to de-scan it because it was a bad scan. And I thought, oh, I've never seen that picture, and it's my mum at a jumbo sale, so it's like, there's a little bit of this constantness of rediscovery of pictures that I was taken, but never scanned or printed or anything like that, And this was at the back of their house, and I have actually photographed Stephen in the same place again, just a couple of years back, And this is Andrea, my sister Andrea, and so she's the mother of the children and family, and her face doesn't really appear in that work, so I thought it was, perhaps fitting that her face should appear, somewhere. And it was a choice that she made at the very beginning of that project. Mm-hmm. She said to me, oh, that's fine, do the pictures and that, but oh, don't show my face. And I said, okay. And then, so I started taking pictures without her face in it. And then during it, she was kind of like, oh, it's fine to show my face now. She was quite happy for it to be photographed. But by this time, I'd actually decided that the project was really about the about her children. And actually it was correct. That kind of initial request that she did with me was the correct one, which shaped the actual full project.
Yeah, it's really interesting how an image from, like, say, 30 years ago can reappear and speak to you across that time. So that kind of clicking between the past and the present is really quite salient within the two bodies of work, the family and in this place. And you made a video which connects the both of those series, which is quite moving, and has you speaking a narrative to that. And I think it would be a good time to maybe show that to people right now. So let's see the video now, Margaret.
Okay. Back in 1994, I photographed my late sister Andrea and her 3 children. The series family centred on Stephen, Kelly and Chick, and it gave a small insight into their childhood world at that moment in time and in those particular life circumstances. Over 20 years later, I returned to this work, looking at where they had started in life and where they found themselves now. Andrea had died in 2008, and the now adult children had not moved far, going from one area of social and economic deprivation to another, and this was just a simple bus ride across town. This left a question in my mind. What was the role of environment and opportunity in their lives? How much choice had they ever actually had, and how much was predetermined for them? In this place is about both a personal space in the mind, where we are led to believe what we can and cannot do, but importantly, it's also an external space in the environment, where society, the system, gives or doesn't give us a choice. And the two are so intertwined in a complex dance that it's hard to take one away from the other. Kelly talked to me of showing ordinary people with ordinary lives, that she wanted lives like hers and her family's to be seen, to know that experiences like hers have significance, that their stories, their lives are important, that they should be visible and should be told. For really, if you've never been there, lived that life, in those circumstances, in that place, then you can't fully understand. But you can try, you can listen, and you can see. In this photograph of Chick, she is standing at the back of her flat. She was only 5 years old when I first photographed her, and by the time we started updating the series, she was now a mother living with her own daughter. Over the years, Chick's life has had its ups and downs. She has been in homeless accommodation, living in temporary places, but she's always tried to do her best for her and her daughter. Chick talked to me a lot about where she stayed and what she thought about that. She talked about having a place where she felt like she belonged, and it was really important for her to have this sense of place, that she belonged to that place, even though in some ways it was quite imperfect. When her daughter was born, Chick had been living with her own mum, who died in 2008. The sense of loss has continued throughout Chick's life, and it's something that's felt very deeply within her, and it's also something that's very perceivable when you're there. But she is also very aware that while she belongs here, she may not always have been offered the choices in life that other people have had, and that, in a sense, has limited what she thinks she actually wants, or is even entitled to.
In this photograph of Kelly, she is standing at the window of her third floor flat. She has a small veranda and she could go out there and look over the neighbouring area. This is something that Kelly did an awful lot of the time. So when I would be there visiting, sometimes I would be doing photographs, sometimes not. But Kelly was often at the window. So this kind of worked its way into the photographs I did of her. Kelly talked at length about what she thought about her life, how she thought it turned out, and what she thought she might like in life as well. One thing that she often said was that sometimes she would just quite like to run away from it all, take her children to somewhere new and start anew. But then she would turn to me and say, "But where would I go?" This was a reoccurring theme throughout a lot of the work, that people understood their situation but didn't know how to change that situation. So Kelly would stand there and look out the window a lot, and she would think about her life, and she would think about going other places, but she also very much understood that the ability for her to actually do that was very limited, socially, emotionally, and most importantly, economically. In this photograph of Stephen, he is sitting in his homeless accommodation. So that is temporary accommodation that he was in until he was given a more permanent place to live. I photographed Stephen here after I've been talking to his sister Chick, who lived just over the road, and she'd been telling me how when you move into this type of accommodation, everything's the same. So the walls are the same, the couches are the same, the furniture, the curtains, and everybody knows that when they come in that you are in homeless accommodation, so that this is a home, but you're still homeless. And for some people this is seen as a mark of shame. That doesn't always make sense, but that's how it's experienced. So when he moved in, Chick gave him lots of things to try and make it more like a home. She gave him the basics, she gave him salt and pepper, mayonnaise and bin bags, but she also gave him something very important. She gave him pictures of the Waynes. So she gave him a photograph of her daughter and also of Kelly's daughters. And Stephen told me that when he sat there, he would often look out the window. He was on the third floor of this flat, and he would look over the roofs of the lower houses to where his mum's flat had been on the other side. And Stephen had lived there with his mum before she died, so he would often stare out this window, looking over to where this building, which was now demolished, used to be and was no longer.
So that's great to see that piece really well made. And the work's continued, hasn't it? What's this image here?
It has continued. I mean, it wasn't something that I really planned to do, I have to say. About the summer of 2017, that in this place really sort of wound itself up as a project, and it felt like it came to a natural conclusion as a project, you know. And I also don't think that, you know, I'm negotiating a sort of a way of photographing with my family here. I'm not wanting to use them as a subject for me. They are my family, you know. So I feel like there's this negotiation that we have, and if people would want to be photographed and don't want to be photographed, you know, there's a constant thing that we review as it goes on. So in the summer of 2017, it felt to me like, you know, and to them, that this project was at an end, and we'd been doing it, you know, for a year and a half at that time. And so this project, what happened was, my niece Kelly, her life changed very dramatically just towards the sort of autumn of that year, and she got very seriously ill. And she asked me, you know, she was in hospital in Glasgow at the time. I was seeing her a lot of the time, you know, practically daily at that time. And she said to me, will you continue to make the work? And I said, well, if you want me to make the work, then I will make it. But it wasn't like I thought, oh, well, Kelly's life is changing, I'm going to take photographs of it. I was actually really reticent to take photographs of it. And so I started photographing again. And I mean, I say this work is ongoing. It's probably an end in some ways, but I'm just leaving it sitting there, you know, as a series. And it really looks at Kelly and her family, and how they are coping with the sort of new circumstances that she's found herself in. So it's a little bit more concentrated on that one aspect of Kelly and her children. So I photographed them a little bit, and a lot of the time it was, I mean, we found out that what happened was their story became quite circular in a way, because they'd grown up in this one area, you know, like it's sort of said about in one side of Stirling in the Ratloch. They moved over to the other side, which is St Ninians. And then because Kelly got ill, she was declared homeless again because she couldn't climb the stairs. So what they did was she was rehomed, and she ended up being rehomed in the same street that she grew up. So back on the very same street, practically over the road from the house that she grew up in, where all the pictures of family are taken. And this picture here is taken in that temporary housing that she was in at that time. I sort of want you to also maybe discuss other work that I was doing. So I mean, the family work continues. It goes on, off and on. It ebbs and flows, I would say. I wouldn't say it's something that I feel that I need to work on all the time. As I said, I don't think it's a good thing to sit there and work on it all the time. So I also have been working, you know, I mean, a lot of my projects are projects that sometimes happen over a really long period of time. So it's not like I say, right, I'm going to sort of work on this and it's going to be done within 2 months. And so I've been working on this project all around home and belonging for quite a long time now. And this photograph here on the left is actually a fairly recent picture, and it's actually going into Invisible Britain's book, which will be out, I think, at the end of this year. And it's called This Separated Isle. But at the same time as going into that, it fits into my overall project work that I'm working on. And that book's going to be looking at sort of concepts of, you know, identity in modern Britain. So for me, working on these aspects of what does it feel to belong to somewhere, it's, you know, very pertinent as well. And this is more recent work from that sort of same project. This was photographed this year, you know, so it's for me, it's obviously we've had a bit of a pause because of, you know, coronavirus, but you know, the sort of themes are sort of ongoing for me. They're sort of continuing. And the person on the left is someone that I've been working with again quite intensively for another project, and then I will bring them into another one if I feel like it's relevant at the same time. This image here is again a very recent image, and it's again from this this project all around home, housing, belonging, and I'm working a lot with homeless people, and so I'm working with the support of Shelter Scotland as well, and we're working with the peer network, which is called Time for Change with Shelter Scotland. And within that, I'm working with people with a lived experience of homelessness. And so this project has been in a really big planning stage for about at least a year, and sort of leading into it. And the actual production stage is actually just starting to happen. And then coronavirus happened. So we're now on a bit of a pause for that, you know, because of that. And this image, actually, this is one that was in The Guardian yesterday, is Michael. And so Michael's story is told a little bit more in depth within that article. Because I think for me, I'm trying to, you know, I'm working on a very long-term project on one hand. I'm very fortunate that, you know, this has got funding to you know, go ahead. And but on the other side, I'm also trying to get the issues and to raise awareness on this more sort of editorial way as well, which I think is quite important, you know, that I'm just not saying, well, my work belongs in a gallery or something like that. I'm trying to sort of share it in different ways to gain that maximum awareness sort of raising.
It's a wonderful story, Margaret, in actual fact, the piece in The Guardian. So I recommend the audience to look that up. It's quite inspiring.
Oh, thank you. Michael's an unbelievably inspiring person. I mean, this image here was taken just before lockdown, so this particular one, and then his story, which is featured within the piece in The Guardian, tells 7 weeks into it what he was actually been doing as he, you know, walks his way around Edinburgh, feeding people who've been in a sort of situation that he's in himself, but just, you know, beforehand.
And you've got some support from Creative Scotland for this project, which is good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great news, yeah. So I'm really pleased to have funding for it. And it's going to be a long-term project over the next year. And I'm working, I mean, it's difficult sort of timing in a sense, you know, obviously, because I'm trying to work throughout Scotland, but obviously that's now on hold. But in a way, it's quite positive because what I'm doing is we're going through lots of other methods of communicating. So we're doing, obviously I did the sort of photo essay with Michael, but the way that I'm working with other people who are already involved is actually, you know, going through doing remote things. So we're, you know, I'm setting up, you know, groups for them on Google Photos, we're doing web pages, we're doing lots and lots of communication. So this is, for me, it's really important that, again, it's about building those connections and those relationships. And it's not just about going in and doing one thing with them in one day. It's about continuing to go back, you know. And I mean, even like with the photo essay, everybody that's been photographed in that photo essay now has a copy of their photograph. You know, it's gone back to them again. And now Michael himself is thinking about how he's going to create his own work around that. So for me, that's a really important part of it.
So he's been taking images as well.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yep. So, and a lot of that is coming out of, you know, us working together on that. He started to do his own work, and I have other people within the sort of who are within the Time for Change network, and they're doing the same thing as well. And a lot of that we can do remotely, you know. So that's kind of a lot of that we're working on at the moment. I mean, this project. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, what's this image here?
All right, sorry.
No.
So again, yeah, working within this kind of youth childhood, and I got involved, it's through a local organisation, a charity called the Children's Wood here in Glasgow, very local to me. And they've been, they have some community land, and that they've been working on that's sort of they've managed to sort of gain support for this over many, many years. And then recently they started a project up, and they were engaging with the local youth in the area, asking them how they could get involved with working on it as well. And so they started up this base, and the base is it's called the Youth House, and that's a project that I've called it. And it's basically looking at this, supporting the community for people through a grassroots organisation. So, and these photographs were taken in November, December last year, part of a sort of loan pool sort of project. And I went into the base just as they got the base. So this is at the very, very beginning of this, that I'm trying to document what is happening in the story of these young people. And I mean, it's again, there's some of these images are on my website if people want to go and have a look a wee bit more in depth at them. And they'll sort of tell you a wee bit more of the background to that, the story behind the Youth House as well, which is a really important story of community. But another part of that for me as well is also this, this thing with this dual running, in a sense, which is me working with the people that I'm photographing. I really dislike going in and just photographing people. It's not the way I like to work at all. I like to build those connections over a long time. So I also, at the same time as asking about photographing within the Youth House, I asked if I could volunteer as well to go in and start teaching photography skills or anything that they thought would be useful for the kids, And we've already, in a short space of time, again, this is before lockdown, these were done, the first few months of this year. I would go in, and only when time allows, so maybe every couple of weeks, something like that. And already some of the kids have produced their own photographs and made their own books, So I think that's a really important part of it for me as well. And then my wee geysers. This has been quite a long-term project, but only one night a year. So not a super, it's not. I could call it long-term, but in some ways I think that's a bit cheeky because it is only one night a year that I've done it over. So it's 5 years of photographs.
Yeah.
And I love guising as a kid. I'm really into guising, and lots of people think that guising is or trick or treat. They think that it's an American invention. And obviously, as a Scottish person, I know this isn't the case. So I decided that I wanted to do this project around children who were all coming around my street here in Glasgow, and they were guising. And I thought it was amazing, the costumes that they were wearing. And so I know all these children. So these are, or I know they're through friends of friends and things like that. I don't just pluck people off the street to photograph them. And so this is actually in where I'm sitting now, it was taken over there. These photographs are taken just at the window. And when the kids came in, I would ask if I could take their picture, So over the 5 years, I've built up about 100 photographs now of the kids, and they're quite amazing, the kind of things that they're wearing or dressing up as, and some of them are like the scary ones, like you would expect for people coming around guising, and other ones, we're starting getting political ones that are coming in. You've got sort of fantasy play, so it's really, really interesting, I think, just looking at what they're actually wearing and what they're choosing to wear, and it's giving you that, it's a wee bit of an insight into their minds. And it's a really important thing for a lot of these kids. They're planning it for many months. And also where I am, they go to school dresses, in primary school at least. They would go to school dressed in their Halloween costumes and then come home in them as well. You can sort of see a sort of range of the 100 of them here. And there's such a range, It's and I do think that, as looking at them, I think that these pictures need to be a big set like this, because that's part of that story of these children at this time in Scotland, is that they're being influenced by all these different things, and it will change. It will change as it goes on, and yes. 5 years' time, probably the costumes will change. We'll still have the witches, but we'll probably have different TV characters coming in.
Yeah, it is a reflection of popular culture.
Absolutely,
and as well. But you probably have the same kids, or some of the same kids, coming back each year as well. Yeah. So you've got something of a a kind of document of time to some extent. It's really interesting because we've used a few of these, as people will know, hopefully, to share another photo challenge. We thought this would be quite a good one at the time of many, months of lockdown. We thought that this work offered a fun opportunity to dress up and to consider who would you like to be right now. So that's what we're asking people to do, to dress up in a costume to reflect your own lockdown self, real or imagined. Take a photograph of yourself and send it to us through the links that we've shared on our Facebook and on our website. So sorry to interrupt you there, Margaret.
Oh, that's okay. No, I think the main thing a lot about these photographs, I mean, we can see 100 in front of us now, is that they're mostly all homemade, which is a really important part of this as well. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 which are bought. There's nothing wrong with buying your costume, but it's more about the possibilities of what you can actually make at home.
Yeah, it's better for the imagination. But say that must have involved a lot of peanuts and sweets on your part, yes?
Peanuts are not so popular nowadays. We have to sort of get rid of them, but it's the sweeties galore. I'm sort of buying sweeties in the weeks leading up to it, adding to my stash of sweeties, sort of sitting there. And I mean, we used to do like Duke and Apples and things like that, but as it's got busier over the years, I mean, a friend of mine called it my geyser studio, and I quite like that idea that they were all popping in, for that. It was anyway, it's a great fun. It's been a great sort of fun project for me as well, because I work on things that can be quite serious and quite emotional, and so for me this is a different way of working, which is quite important as well.
Yeah, very good. Okay, and this the story project, you've been working on this for quite some time now, on and off, haven't you?
Oh, definitely off and on. It's been going on for maybe about 3 years, maybe 4 years. But I set it up because, I don't just like looking at my own photos, and I quite like looking at other people's portraits. And I guess, I mean, going into photography, you're always a wee bit nosy anyway into people's lives and the kind of work that I do. But I'm also equally inquisitive about why other photographers do the kind of work that they do, and I think it's really interesting to try and find out and ask them what that process is. So the story portrait is basically, I'm a wee bit nerdy as well, so I enjoy web design, so it kind of fulfills that wee side of me. And the story portrait basically asks photographers to share one portrait and a story behind that portrait, to talk about that process that they have. And they're all very different, which is also really important as well, is to show that breadth in photography.
Okay, and this is on Instagram, yeah?
No, actually, I haven't made an Instagram account for it. I've got a Facebook page for it at the moment. I think in the future, as we go ahead with it, an Instagram account is where it would go. Because, and then that way we can do takeovers and things like that as well, and people can sort of show more of their work, not just the one portrait that's actually on the website. But yeah, that's for the future, I think. Definitely.
And people submit to this, or is this work that you have sought out or come across?
Well, initially I was seeking out, sort of work, but I've also got a sort of an open submission kind of thing where you can just, drop me a line with a proposal. Because I can't put up, I mean, obviously I'm a working photographer as well. I can't spend all my time on this. So yeah, proposals are welcome to, for going up onto the website, absolutely.
Okay. So has being in lockdown allowed you more time to kind of revitalise the story project then?
It basically gave me that little bit of space in my head for going back to that, because I'd really liked doing it as a project, and then it kind of stopped for a bit So for me, it was really, really good to be able to, you know, I mean, I don't actually think I've had loads of time during lockdown. I've had different type of time, I think is what's happened, because I wasn't able to do the kind of work that I usually do. So it's given me that wee bit of space to sort of explore different things, and the story portrait's a really big part of that, because I see it as a really, you know, important thing for myself to do, which is taking me away from my own photography. I mean, this is an example here as well of, you know, other work that I've been doing. This is my son, and at the very beginning of lockdown, I asked him if we could do a photograph, and I kind of had the plan that we would do a picture, you know, every day. It's mostly done in the evening, you know, that it became a bit of a ritual, you know, as we sort of, you know, sort of wound down at the end of every day. I would take a photograph of him in the kitchen. And I think, you know, you can even see my haircut happening here during it. When I did he asked me for a haircut and I did it. But I also think it's a bit of a story of the situation for him. You know, he's a teen, and there is I think as we come out of lockdown, there's going to be a lot of, you know, a lot of people with different stories, and lots of some difficult stories sometimes of how they've experienced lockdown themselves. And what interested me is my son's mostly into chemistry and history, but he really enjoyed doing this. And he looked at the pictures, I've got them, they're pinned up behind me here, and he said, oh, I'd quite like to make a book of that. So for me, that was quite important that he came and sort of said, I want to now create something in a different way. And there's some days that are missing as the lockdowns continued. And I said to him, well, you know, there's days, what will we do if we make a book? How will we format that? It's a book for him. It's not a book for selling, it's for him. And he said, I will leave the blank pages because that says a lot. So I think that's a, you know, a pretty insightful sort of thing to say from a 14-year-old as well.
It is indeed. That'll become quite an important document in the future
For
as
him,
well
yeah.
for him. A
Definitely.
wonderful way of marking time, and very cooperative of your son
I
to
know.
participate in this way. Yes,
I always say that he doesn't like me. He's not let me photograph him much over the years, which is someone who loves to take pictures of kids was quite a shock in some ways. But as actually he's got older, he has actually, you know, he's opened up to being part of that process. So he lets me photograph him more now. And these pictures, I mean, they're very short pictures. We don't take a lot of time. They're very quick. They're on sort of a Fuji instant, you know, thing. So it's just basically a Polaroid, and it's done, you know, a very quick process.
Okay. Well, that's such a range of work, Margaret. It's jaw-dropping. and in its depths and complexities, but maybe it's probably time to take some questions from the audience now, if that's okay with you, Margaret. So maybe we'll see if there's any questions come in so far, and we'll open it out. So there's a question has come in from Casamar, a student at City of Glasgow College. Now she used to work at Stirling Council in the mobile library.
All right.
And she says that as a woman, she was not allowed to go to the Raploch. So it's not so much a question, it's more about a statement, but it does relate to what you've said on a number of occasions, that you don't want to kind of reinforce the notion or the stereotypes about the place of the Raploch. But would you like to respond to that in any way?
I mean, yes. I mean, it was difficult because I would say that, excuse me, when I was photographing there with the family work, I made a decision at the time not to actually, excuse me, my glasses, I'll put my hair on my face. I made the decision not to actually say at that time, this is the Raploch, because I knew back then it had a real, you know, its reputation went before it at that time. And I mean, as I said, I didn't grow up. My childhood wasn't in the Rat Block, but I came back, and you know, quite a large part of my family was living there at that time. And I mean, it was a new environment for me, new circumstances, things like that. But I was also very acutely aware that it was that this reputation was there as well. So I was, you know, there was always that kind of balancing that, and I find it quite difficult, because I know, I mean, there's this sort of, I've got this, I think there's a complex stance even within myself. I think that my sister had a really, really good support community around her. And I think that, you know, it was really good at that time for her, that she had really good neighbours and people for her. And personally, it was quite an unfair way to judge it, but it was judged like that, yeah, definitely.
It's one of the difficulties or the challenges of documentary photography, although you might say that you moved from photography to environmental portraiture because it was more collaborative. But you have also remarked at various times about that, you know, the tension about presenting people who come from a certain place, who might be seen by people who might have not experienced social or cultural inequality, but I suppose that is the way it is. But an important thing there is the kind of mode of distribution, isn't it? About how people are seen, you know, who they're seen by, and in what context they're seen. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that was always, like, you know, a really important thing. You know, when I started going back into doing this place, I didn't really go back with a plan, you know. There wasn't, I sort of went back, and I think it was in 2015 we started talking about it, and I said to my family, would you like to perhaps be involved in updating up the project that we did back in 1994? And we talked about it for a long time, so it was about 9 months before we actually started photographing it, because, you know, I'm acutely aware of that representation and what that is, but in some ways, you know, it's actually an opportunity for me to actually do them, you know, to be more respectful. Than there's quite a lot of photography out there which might not be treating people in similar circumstances that way. And for me, this is just a human story, you know. So yeah. I think it's incredibly important.
Yeah, and that does echo a couple of comments made here, or questions. One from Alicia Bruce: there's a clear respect and authenticity to your portraits, especially in this place. Also a formality and clear interaction between you and your relatives. How do you share your ideas and concepts with them? Are they involved in the mood stroke composition?
I think some of the stories, the way that I compose pictures, actually come through the discussion. So, I mean, it's different than going into a job like an editorial job, for example, where you'll go in and you'll be told to photograph someone, and you quickly look around and decide how to do it. And with this, I mean, I didn't go in and like photograph the first day. As I said, there was a really, really long lead-in period to that. And then we actually said, okay, now we'll start photographing. It was actually in Easter of 2016 that we started. And the very first photograph was Leah in the back court. And that was the first photograph of it. And that photograph probably shaped how the project started to go, because I didn't have a plan in mind. I'm not a person with a big plan, you know, with these kind of projects. And I think that it was, you know, really important for me to sort of see how they responded and what happened. I mean, with Leah, for example, we went for a walk. And we photographed her, I think, in 3 places. And then we ended up at the back of the flats where she lives. And everything came together because she stood there. This was her place, this was her environment, and this was all about, you know, who she was. And, you know, the other photographs were nice photographs, perhaps, but they didn't actually have a story about her. So for me, it's really important that I take that time to go for walks. And I did the same thing with Stephen, you know, when we photographed him in the sort of mist fog. It was also a walk, you know, and we took several pictures during it as well.
Okay, if I could conjoin a couple of questions here, one from One from Isaac Timmermans. Can you tell us about how your relatives feel about the work, especially Andrea's kids looking at themselves as kids? And Colin Gray, do you or your relatives feel any different about the work since it has had a lot of media exposure? Now, I beg your pardon, they're kind of two separate questions. But
you might have to remind me of them.
Right, okay, let's go with Isaac's first. How do your relatives feel about the work, especially Andrea's?
So the old stuff, the 1994 stuff was, I mean, I think there's a certain nostalgia there, you know, and also there were children when we photographed it. So Chick was 5, and then they've got 3 years between them. So there was Stephen was about 10 because he's, you know, just because of the months of the birthdays. But, you know, the youngest was 5 and the oldest was 10 at the time that we were actually photographing it. So Chick probably doesn't have loads of memory of actually me photographing. The other two have a little bit of a memory of it during the time. But it's also really a really pertinent thing now, and you know, in some ways are more poignant because obviously their mum died, you know, my sister in 2008, and to now be able to go back to this time, and even though she's not in the pictures, there's pictures where her hand is there, you know, it's about this care and it's about this relationship that she was there, and it was a very difficult time for her. But she was trying her hardest, you know, and that was hopefully part of what that series was about being in difficult circumstances, but also, you know, managing to actually get on with it and, you know, provide, you know, as best as you could for your family. And I think that probably for them, for the children now, comes across, and there's lots of love for them within that series looking at it.
Yeah. And Colin's question, do your relatives feel any different about the work since it has had a lot of media exposure? Now, a lot of media exposure might mean it's had a lot of media exposure in the photography sector, but not necessarily outside of that. But not to preempt Colin's questions there, do they think any different about it in terms of what they might have seen, about how they're portrayed?
No, I don't think it's had, well, I don't think there's been a negative, sort of anything negative has come out of it. You know, it's been quite, you know, perhaps none of us really thought that it would actually be seen as widely as it's been seen. As I said, there wasn't a plan. I don't have a plan for my photography. It just kind of, you know, it followed its natural course at the time after it was shown in AMBIT at street level. And it just went from different places. And every exhibition that we've had, there's been great support from them going forwards. The last exhibition was over of this work. We had one in Paris, you know, and in some ways I actually want to take them all with me to go there. And then that's just not possible. So it's always, for me, there's a bit of difficulty with that. You know, I'm kind of pulled with that kind of thing. But they did come up to street level, you know, and they saw all the work, you know, when it was there. It's never been on in Stirling. So, you know, it's never been on locally to them.
You had to work quite hard, though, to get your relatives to come to see the exhibition in a gallery, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I mean, it's outside, you know, it's like if you'd said that to me, you know, before, you know, my life changed myself, you know, when I went to study, you know, it's when I left home and went away and then came back, went to university, your life changes, and it's something that's outside of their normal experience, you know. But no, they did. They came up. Stephen didn't come up, but you know, the most of them came up to see it, and the kids, and we had a great day. We came along to street level, and then we went, and you know, after that, they got their pictures done. We've got lots of pictures of it beside their picture and things like that. And then, you know, we went to the pub, and then we went for something to eat. So we had a great family day, you know. So it wasn't just about come and see your photos and up in the wall and then that's it, but it's more about it's still that family thing that you're trying to create with that, you know. It's a wee bit more than just the photographs always.
Yeah, obviously it's the experience and the encounter,
yeah,
and what you take away with it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ian McLean asks, what way are you sharing your work with Shelter? You just kind of mentioned that you have been working with Shelter there, Margaret.
Yeah. So I mean, I've worked with Shelter I've worked with them last year as a client well. So I photographed some of their campaign work and things like that last year. But I wanted to work on a really personal project, which was not to do with what they were doing. Just their sort of the images that they wanted me to take, and I sort of proposed to them about a year ago now. Me working on this very long-term project around inequality within housing and home, and so that's taken quite a long time to get underway, and now we're very well established in that. I'm working with the Time for Change peer network, and that's throughout Scotland, but I'm working very intensively in Edinburgh with a guy called William Wright in Shelter, and he's a development worker over there. And within that, there's lots of what is peers, so it's people with lived experience of homelessness. And so it's within that network that now that I'm going on, and you've seen some of the pictures tonight. So it's them, that's the way that I'm photographing and working with them. And we're also working remotely at the moment, yeah. And so the Guardian piece is a slightly different thing, so that's probably taking like one person's story and looking at it, because I thought that the story of Michael, what was happening during the coronavirus, was actually a really important story of what he was doing, as a person who is experiencing homelessness and helping other people who are, as he, in more difficult situation than him.
Yeah. And you've got to phone Michael back this evening, because
I do, yeah. He just phoned me just before we came on, yeah.
To share some news with you. A couple of kind of technical questions, Margaret. One is, do you process your own film and send them to a lab, then print digital? The other question is that question: what advice would you give to new graduates? Can you be more specific in that question?
I would say that for the film thing, I work across everything. So I work digitally. Mostly commercial work is done digital. Most of my personal projects are done on film. I process my own black and white here, hang them up to dry in the bathroom. I've sometimes processed at street level though as well. I've done that as well. Colour stuff I send to the lab because it's just easier for me. I don't actually want to process my own colour. I don't want to do C41. I just want to get them back, and then I scan them here, and then I come into street level as well and I scan. So I'm a member at street level as well for using the scanning facilities and that there. So I do a lot of the work myself, but that show I send stuff away to a lab for that. For the sort of question about, is it advice for?
I guess it is. It's that question. What advice would you give to graduates who are interested in working in the documentary mode?
I mean, what I did when I left, I know it's not a popular thing because it's, I actually volunteered because, and I know that, we can't work for nothing, but I volunteered a little bit, and I worked on a paid thing as well at the same time. And I volunteered, and I said I went into ArtLink actually, and then within 2 weeks they gave me a job because they said, no, we're going to find a way to actually employ you to do this. So I think that sometimes it's about reaching out to, sometimes it's reaching out to those sort of organisations that you would like to work with. And I probably contacted other people, and they were kind of like, no, we don't need anybody there now or whatever. But for me, it was a really, really good thing to sort of take that little step. And that was I only volunteered for 2 weeks, and then I started working. I got working. It was really good. Yeah. But I also think it's really good to know that it takes time. I'm pretty old. I'm not like super young. It's also, it's good to have a good support network around you and work within that photography community, and to try and build, like those support networks within that as well. I think that's probably my advice, is to try and keep up. It can be a lonely business being a photographer,
So that's very important, building up networks, getting yourself out there, creating things round about you. That question, advice on two graduates, was from Shona Kelly. Sorry, I missed part of her question there. She says she's a big fan of your work. She's just graduated from Duncan and Jordanstone College of Art in Dundee with a fine art degree, but she only works with film photography.
Yeah.
I think you might have partly answered that question.
Yeah.
Advice
I
to
mean, I
you,
mostly work with film, you know. I mean, all in this place was all photographed on film. Obviously, the '94 stuff is, but in this place, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 pictures out the whole series that I did in digital, and it was mostly because it was a lens, you know, issue, because I wanted you know, not a lot of depth of field, and I didn't have it with my film camera. So, but mostly, yeah, all film.
Yeah. There was another question from Lee Postrophe, which you might want to go back to that one, Margaret, post this Q&A, if that's okay with Lee. An interesting one. But Leslie Fleming, she's a housing officer in Fife and a photographer. Should be sharing our work with colleagues. Thank you. Your point about personal space and temporary accommodation is such an important point. Are you planning any documentation of home post-COVID?
What? Sorry, I'm not sure.
Are you planning any documentation of home post-COVID? And I guess you're kind of working on that at the moment in terms of the.
I mean, we're working. Obviously, the big project that I'm working on is, you know, there's some postponement of elements of it. I just can't do it because of the travel limitations, and you know, because I'm wanting to travel and stay places, and I can't do that. You know, so we're waiting as lockdown eases even more. That will change, you know, but there's a lot of planning at the moment happening, but also the whole home project that I'm working on, we've got lots of, I mean, it's been good in some ways, the lockdown. I mean, I've done lots of walking and photographing things rather than people, which is interesting for me. I mostly photograph people. But I'm also building up within the sort of shelter networks. We've been doing lots and lots of work. There's one of the guys who's set up his own Instagram account. He's photographing, you know, brilliantly. He's, you know, doing so much stuff. Another guy who's doing it via Google Photos with me. So I don't feel that we've actually stopped working on that project at all. It's, if anything, it's very, you know, it's very much alive and happening every day.
Yeah, okay. Somebody else has asked a question about model release forms, but maybe you can answer that in retrospect. All of this is built upon trust and negotiation, as you have said, but there is the formality of model release forms, I said. But you can go and have a look at that. So there's no other kind of salient questions except Steve Moston asks, what's next, Margaret?
Well, my home project, you know, that's within the next year. That's going to be ongoing. I'm hoping also that, you know, so once that's just an ongoing project. Hopefully it will go for exhibition somewhere. Not only my work, but the people who I'm working with, their work as well. I'm also currently, I'm part of at the moment I'm doing an online residency with, there's 8 of us across, I think probably 4 countries actually. And it's an online residency where we, it's a sort of password protected website, and we post photographs and we get feedback as well. And I'm also, that's a really great thing for us, that support network that I was sort of talking about. And I've got an article coming out, Simois, sort of French magazine, that will be out, I think maybe autumn winter edition. It's only out every 6 months, and that's coming up as well. But project by me, it's that continuation of the home project.
Yeah, okay. And I'm not sure if there's any people involved in publishing tonight, but you did produce a very limited edition newspaper club version of In This Place, which is wonderful. And it's in that awkward format, Margaret, that you have to kind of carry it about in a portfolio. I know, if you don't want to fold it up and put it in your pocket like a newspaper. And similarly with the Geysers, which was this wonderful edition as well. And I think there's a few left of them. In This Place is finished now, but In This Place is and Families is a wonderful book. There's a book there waiting for a publisher if only he or she would recognise that. But on the subject of the geysers, what's your most memorable costume in the geysers?
Well, there's so many, you know. I mean, well, actually, it has to be the unicorn, you know, because the unicorn's two people, and it's a friend of mine who's kids and her friend who live along the street here, and their kids actually walk to school dressed as a unicorn. I watched it out the front window. This was, I don't know if it was primary 7 or that at the time, and I looked out the window and there's a unicorn walking to school in the morning. So just, you know, it was amazing. There was 2 children in this costume. It's on my website. You can see the actual costume. So for that alone, and they actually walked home again after the Halloween parties at school as the unicorn.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And I think that should be done outside of that period of Halloween anyway.
Yeah.
Because it's very creative. But just remember, folks, that there is the photo challenge, and we're using Margaret's geysers as an inspiration for that. So look it up on our website and on our Facebook as well. But if there's not any other immediate questions here, I think we'll probably draw it to a close, Margaret, if you're happy with that.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much for asking me along.
Yeah, just read out, tell us your website address again.
It's my name. It's margaretmitchell.co.uk, because if you go to the .com, you'll get the American writer. That's not me. So yeah, margaretmitchell.co.uk.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Margaret, for sharing all of this work and your comments, and it's been wonderful. And I hope the audience has enjoyed that too. So just remember for people to tune in again, and I know that we're all in this lockdown situation, but just remember where art and creativity comes in. It's about feeding minds and not endless feeds. So thank you again, Margaret, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.